Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Gray Matter. I think that you're going to be really excited to meet our guest today. On her website, she's described as a builder and destroyer. She says, "My life's work has taught me that creating is typically hard, unglamorous work." Wow, is that ever true? And she says it does not make headlines. It does not go viral. It is not done from behind a mask or in the shadows of TikTok. It requires dedication, rigor, compassion, and commitment. She says, "Let's build." Dr. Shoshana Shulman, welcome to Gray Matter. It's a real pleasure to have you on our program today.
Thanks, Leighton.
So, before we dive in, and we're going to talk about some of the amazing work that she is doing in medicine and science. Obviously, we're going to go to our framing aphorisms. Some of them apply to her, but generally to our topic. One is from Auguste Babel, who said that anti-Semitism is the socialism of fools. Dr. Roger Scruton, who said something similar to what Dr. Shendelman says on her website. He said conservatism starts from a sentiment that all mature people can readily share, the sentiment that good things are easily destroyed but not easily created. And Mahatma Gandhi, who said there is a higher court than courts of justice, and that is the court of conscience. It supersedes all other courts. So, who do we have in the show today? Well, I mentioned Dr. Shoshana Shendelman, incredibly accomplished person, a PhD, is a scientist and entrepreneur who's founded numerous biotech companies. She's a pioneer in the development of drugs for rare and underserved diseases. So very, very important work, as she says, is unglamorous, but really important, life-saving work. And currently she is vice chair of the board of advisors at Columbia University Medical Center and Columbia University Evangelos College of Physicians and Surgeons. And she has a resume. I could go on and on the whole hour just going through her resume. She's a very busy a lady. But Shoshana, I wanted to start here. In researching you, you have a really interesting history, and I think I'd be remiss in not talking about it. Your family emigrated from, I guess at the time it was Persia, now Iran, and your whole family came over, and from what I can gather, it's been an incredible success story for you and other members of your family. Coming over to the United States, really, to getting away from Revolutionary War there. I wonder if you could talk about, just your background. What was the motivation for you and members of your family, sort of being first generation immigrants to the United States? Obviously, you've accomplished so many things in your education and in business and medicine. You're so driven. What's the source of that? Where is that coming from for you and other members of your family?
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, as you noted, I was fortunate enough to be born in the United States, but the majority of my family escaped from Iran during the revolution. And I do think that that really left me with values that are applicable to all aspects of life, not just what I've done in my career, that, we need to pick up and, sort of build, move on as best you can. Most of my family left the country with nothing. It was obviously a very urgent situation there. And I think that watching my family members just rebuild their lives from, almost nothing in this country, and not to use it as an excuse, but really as an opportunity. And I think that the United States has been an amazing country to grow up in, and it's offered huge opportunities, not just for my family, obviously, but for everyone to advance yourself, and especially on the educational front. I think, specifically when I think about being a woman and a female scientist, those are opportunities that I wouldn't have had if I had been forced to live my life in Iran. And I think, there's an element of appreciation and gratefulness that we all have in our family for being given the opportunity to be citizens and to live here.
Mhm.
And I think most of my family has really taken advantage of that in every way possible on the education front, building businesses, and really giving back to the community. Most of my family is very community service oriented as well.
Hmm.
And I think that those are just values that have really stuck with me throughout my
Hmm.
life.
Yeah, and of course, you've given back in spades to the United States and to your own community, and even to the community of Columbia University, which I know is very important to you. I'm interested to know, though, obviously, as a woman, and I don't want to sound like a misogynist fool here, but there have been many great female scientists. But let's face it, the field that you're in has been very male dominated, and I'm curious to know, growing up, did you find that you had just an incredible faculty for an interest, a passion for science and medicine, and that drew you to it? What was it that sort of made you follow this particular path that's brought you where you are today?
Yeah, I think you're right. There is an aspect, I think, about inclination towards science and medicine that's probably a little bit genetic. I've always been, um, good at those fields, was drawn to them. Even as a child growing up, I remember being asked in school what I wanted to do when I was older, and I was 11 or 12 years old, I think. And at that time, I thought I wanted to be a marine biologist. Not so far off. So I knew it was something having to do with science, and that is what's interested me. And I think, where I've been drawn throughout my life. But I also think that there are aspects that are somewhat, personality driven or situational. For example, I think this feeling that we're all in this world for a reason and that hopefully we can create positive change and, build something to help others and really give back to the world. That's what drew me specifically to developing drugs for rare and underserved diseases, really
Hmm.
recognizing that there's a need. There's people who, have these terrible diseases and no options, and that if that is where my skills are, and science and medicine, that's a place where I can really give back to the world. So I think that's an important aspect. And then I do think, as you said, this, feeling that there's not really, limitations to where you can go. That was really influenced by my family, and I think what we talked about before, that, having come from another country and needing to rebuild their lives really left me with a sense of personal strength that you
Hmm.
can do what you'd like to achieve as long as you work hard, and really dedicate yourself, that those
Hmm.
opportunities are available.
Yeah, I have a sense that you are very founded in your faith and your personal sense of morality. That seems to be the foundation for all the things that you're doing. Even just listen to your answers here today, you seem to have a very clear idea of purpose in your life. Um, but can you describe maybe how that upbringing that has shaped you as a person, and also sounds like it's even shaped your work? But where does that come from for you? That inspiration to help other people, that seems to be the focus that drives you in your life.
Yeah, it is, and I think a lot of people, it's not just me, it's probably you as well, share that feeling. I think it does, it comes from family values, but also, I do think from spirituality. So, I happen to be Jewish, but, I see this across, a wide range of people I interact with, both on the personal level in what I do, families with children with rare diseases, patients with untreatable types of cancer that we're working on. I see this on the patient side, and I also see it in other colleagues that also work in drug development. Just this generalized feeling that there's purpose in life, that we're offered an opportunity to make the world a better place. And that we should take advantage of that opportunity and, do what we can to help others.
Hmm. They're talking about. I don't want to pigeonhole you and say that talk about the pharmaceutical industry, but let's face it. Part of your work is in developing these new life-saving medicines. I got to know Dr. Jay Bhattacharya a few years ago during COVID. He was an expert witness in a case that I did in Canada, and one of the things that he said really struck me. And he said that one of the maybe the worst long-term implication, longest lasting implication of the COVID-19 pandemic would be the destruction of trust, the
Yeah.
public trust in medicine and public medicine. And this is obviously, I would guess, this is something that is of great concern to you, given the field that you're in. And would you agree with that, first of all? And secondly, do you think there's a pathway to restoring that trust so that people begin to trust medicine more than they are? The example that Dr. Bhattacharya gave me, he said, as something came along that was as deadly as Ebola and as contagious as Omicron, half the population would just ignore it. They wouldn't listen to what health experts were telling them about the medicines they need. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's an important aspect of where we are with drug development, and I think really the government's role in regulation of science and medicine in this country. I hear you. I think you're right. There's a lot of trust that has been lost in the last few years. But I think that there are elements that are probably making it a little bit worse and some things that we can solve, I think,
Right.
and really, um, you know, improve the situation. So, on the one hand, I do think that in the general public, there's not a very detailed understanding of how drug development works and how the FDA approval process works and how treatment decisions are made at government agencies like the CDC, the NIH. And so I think that educating the public a little bit more clearly in as much as we can in a well thought through way, because I do think we live in the age of TikTok, and somebody will just take a snippet that they hear on social
Right.
media and take that as the truth.
Yeah.
And it's something that I've really struggled with, myself as well. On the topic of builders and destroyers that you started off with, I could
Hmm.
spend 10 years building a biotech company, and
Yeah.
a few snippets on social media just take that down. So I
Yeah.
do think that the more people understand, the better off we'll be. But I think there also needs to be some stabilization of decisions and less politicism and variability in the way that our government handles drug development and drug approvals. So,
Hmm.
right now, what we typically see is that leaders at places like the FDA, the CDC, NIH are somewhat appointed or supported by the administration that's in place, and when that changes, then the leadership changes, and that
Right.
makes it very unpredictable for patients, for regular people, but also on the side of drug development, because you could be
Hmm.
spending years developing a drug under the thought process of the person who was previously in charge. And then once they're replaced, it's a completely different situation, and you might have to start over, rerun clinical trials with a different format. And that introduces a lot of risk to pharmaceutical and biotech companies, and it also destabilizes the industry financially as well. So I think that the American people, as well as the pharmaceutical industry, would really benefit from depolitization and stabilization of the government regulatory agencies, at least where it has to
Hmm.
do with science and medicine.
That explanation explains a post that I saw on your page, which is really interesting, where you were talking about superhuman work ethic isn't a choice. You say biotech might look glamorous from the outside, but behind every breakthrough, there are sleepless nights, funding hurdles, FDA delays, the serious responsibility of human lives on the line. And you say, as a CEO, a scientist, and someone who deeply cares, I carry that burden every day because survival can't wait. This isn't about ambition. It's about urgency. It's about purpose. We must do more. Let's build. So now in context, what you're saying is you're sticking your neck out a little bit. You're saying,
Yeah.
we've got to keep our eye on the prize here. The prize is, building life-saving medicines and not losing that for the sake of, let's say scoring political points.
Yeah.
Was that kind of the idea behind that post and what you're trying to say?
Yeah, it is, and I think also, the intention was to give, um, Americans a little bit of a view to what happens behind the scenes. There's no way to fully explain what that's like when you're developing drugs for
Right.
rare and
Yeah.
underserved diseases, but there's a seriousness to it that, I think
Hmm.
might not be, as well understood. You're dealing with people's lives.
Yeah.
In my prior roles, I was developing pediatric drugs, which is a whole other level of terrifying because you're treating
Hmm.
children with experimental drugs. There's two
Hmm.
sides of that, right? There's the families that are desperately pleading for their children to get into the clinical trial or to have access to this drug. And then at the same time, you're on a daily basis, at least I was with my chief medical officer, looking at safety labs and trying to figure out, is everything okay? Are all of the patients on the right track? Is everything going well? So there's a lot of there's a lot of pressures there, and there's pressures in every industry, but I think what's different in the biotech and pharmaceutical industry is that you're dealing with people's, health and safety, their lives, and there's a lot that goes into that people don't see, and there's also, circling back to your prior point about regulatory agencies, there's a lot about the process of drug development and regulatory review that's very opaque. Some of it is opaque to everyone, even on the company side, you don't know
Right.
what's happening behind the scenes at FDA.
Hmm.
And some of it is it's just not communicated publicly. And so I think there have been some steps forward. And I think there are things that our government can do to make the process even more transparent and more predictable so that it's
Right.
less sort of the whim of the moment. And I think that helps everybody. It helps patients and drug developers.
Hmm. Uh, the situation in the United States right now is that RFK Jr. has a reputation for being very anti-vaccine, for example.
Yeah.
And from some of the things that are coming out of the administration, all the way up to the president, and I saw a post where he was, holding a young child and saying, we're not going to fill this young child with vaccines. There seems to be at the moment a lot of tension between the pharmaceutical industry, biotech industry, and what's happening at the top levels of government. But it also seems as though that's on its way to being ironed out. Is that your perception, or do you still see kind of this tension that's going on politically between, the pharmaceutical biotech industry and, you know, the goal for whatever reason to score these political points?
Yeah, I think we're on our way there. I may have a different opinion here than a lot of people in the
That's
industry.
okay.
But, I think that all information is important and we need to,
Right.
constantly be reevaluating information and data that we have when new information comes in.
Yeah.
And I don't feel the same level of anxiety about reviewing new data and taking a second look at things, I think, in the way that some of my colleagues in the industry do.
Hmm.
Because if we look at all of the information and still come to the same decision that, this is what we should be doing, that's not a bad thing. It just means that you've taken a second look. You've now looked at all data, including the newest data available, and you know that the decision is the best one that you could be making. I think I've been a little bit surprised over the last year at the level the level of stress and about just taking another look at things.
Yeah.
But I do think
Yeah.
that it's important that experts in the field and people that are like-minded and open-minded who know about their field of expertise and can say, I know everything available about this rare disease. Now, let me give my opinion on this is important. And so I think some of the nervousness was that maybe the experts in the field were not a party to those decisions.
Hmm.
But I think as long as open-minded, smart people that are knowledgeable on the topic are working together and looking at information, that benefits everyone, and we shouldn't feel anxiety about just the thought of opening up a question again.
Hmm. Hmm. Of course, you're one of these people. You're one of these experts, and I give you a lot of credit for speaking publicly about it because obviously, when you do that, there's risk. But obviously, you've weighed this and you've decided, well, it's more important that I sort of get accurate information out there in the public forum than to sort of just keep my mouth shut and stand on the sidelines. The way, let's face it, a lot of people in the medical field, it's probably the same as it is in my profession in law. People just want to keep their heads down and and work. They don't want to speak out publicly. But you've done that, and I think it's to your great credit that you've done that. And one of the things that you've been talking about is something that I think most people don't understand to be a disease, and this is obesity.
Yeah.
And I just speaking anecdotally here, when I was working on that case with Dr. Bhattacharya, I was looking at medical data involving COVID, and I was really shocked by something that probably won't surprise you, but would certainly shock me. I think would shock a lot of people. During the COVID time, when people would go to hospital with COVID, uh, they would always have comorbidities, all the people who got that sick. And the one comorbidity that always showed up invariably was obesity.
Yeah.
And so this is one of these, I guess, less understood diseases, maladies that you're working on. And one of these drugs that you've been working on concerns obesity. You want to talk about this a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, I do think that obesity it's a terrible issue in our country. Obviously, you probably are aware of the numbers. 42% of the U.S.
Yeah.
population is obese,
Wow.
not just overweight, but
Yeah.
obese. That's a huge number, and there are a lot of diet and lifestyle contributions to that. And so I think it's important that we as a nation have a strategy to prevent obesity, especially the numbers in children are shocking. And that,
Hmm.
really shouldn't be the case because as long as there are responsible adults around, they should be eating healthy food. They should be running around outside. Kids should not be in that situation. And so I think there are a lot of diet and lifestyle modifications that will certainly help the situation. What I think a lot of people don't realize is that once someone is overweight or once they have crossed that threshold and they're obese, there are biochemical mechanisms that then kick in that just exacerbate the situation and make it even harder, than it would be for a normal person to lose weight, to lower their cholesterol, to get things back on track. And as you said, obesity is a huge contributor to other diseases, things like high blood
Hmm.
pressure, heart failure.
It's almost a premature aging of the body, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's it's it hits all fronts, and so
Mm.
I think it is important that there have been treatments now approved for obesity. I think it's one part of it. Obviously, diet and lifestyle are another part, and
Mhm.
that's just as important. But this aspect of actually having prescription drugs available to treat obesity, I think, is also important. And you're right. At my prior company, that is one of the diseases that we worked on and looking
Mhm.
at modifying the way that your body absorbs fat from foods
Mhm.
through a drug that was in development. So I think, the more options we have in front of us, the more treatments that are available alongside the lifestyle modifications will hopefully get our country back on track.
Yeah, one of the things that, RFK Jr. has talked about is, he described it as almost like a vicious circle where and
Very.
he a lot of the blame is on, food additives, processed food, which drives people, at young ages, into overweight and obesity, and then the pharmaceutical industry seems to come in and provide, um, drugs that seem to be solutions. I'm thinking of
Yes.
Ozempic, for example.
Yep.
But you wrote a piece last year saying, defeating obesity requires a new strategy. What did you mean by that? What is the new strategy that you thought of?
Well, I don't want to take credit for something completely novel because I think it is a combination of what many people are thinking right now. But that as much as we can prevent further cases of obesity through, educational initiatives, healthier food available. I think when you and I were growing up, there were initiatives in this country, same as there were stay off drugs,
Yeah.
programs in schools. There was an element of educating people and making sure that they made good choices. By the way,
Hmm.
I think
Hmm.
not doing drugs is a good choice also. And so, I
Unless
think that,
prescribed by your doctor, I guess, right?
yeah, true. True. Not taking illegal drugs is important. And so I think that, educating people, making those choices a little easier when possible. And I think that has been, the route, that a lot of the new government initiatives to make non-processed healthy foods more accessible to people. That's a way to prevent further cases of obesity and maybe get some of the patients that are in the overweight but not yet obese category back to where they should be. But I do think that, as you highlighted, once a person is obese, those fat cells and the biochemical changes that have already taken place make it really difficult to make that kind of progress, for
Hmm.
a lot of people. I know it's counterintuitive, but the more fat cells you have, the hungrier you feel all the time. It should be the opposite, right? So I
Right.
think that's where this element of, having additional tools available, things like prescription drugs, will be helpful in, potentially getting the patients who are obese right now back into, a lower risk category and back on track. So I think that there are elements of prevention, lifestyle choices, and prescription drugs. And maybe at some point in the future, there will not be a need for any prescription drugs because everyone's back where they need to be. But I think it's important to keep an open mind and use the tools that are available.
Hmm. And speaking of prescription drugs, you've also commented, I won't say it's frustration, but let's say constructive criticism of the
Mhm.
FDA, and you came up with 5 reasons why the FDA must evolve. And I expect this comes from your experience as a developer of medicines and wanting to get them, into people's hands so that you can improve their lives more quickly, more effectively. But there are some things that you see that where the FDA could use some approval or some improvement, I should say, in the approval
Yeah.
process. You want to talk about that a little bit because I was struck by this and I found it very interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the number one point is that we need to depoliticize the FDA.
Yeah.
Something like health and medicine, science, it should just be data driven. There shouldn't be politics in there anywhere. Which
Hmm.
goes back to the point we were discussing earlier of,
Yeah.
there's no reason to feel nervous about evaluating new information as long as no one is political about it, and everyone is just data driven and making the best decisions that we can with the information that we have.
Right.
There's a huge political aspect at the FDA. I think it has no right to be there, and we need to get rid of that as quickly as possible. I do also think that, one of the reasons that, that the political elements and opinions at FDA are able to take hold is because a lot of the regulations at FDA right now, allow for a wide spectrum of, interpretation. So the one that people point to most often that I think is probably most easily understood by the general public, is that in order for drugs to be approved based on, biomarkers or any data really that's not, a clinical endpoint, this pathway exists at the FDA. It's been used for a lot of drugs. It's called the accelerated approval pathway, but there's a piece in there that leaves it very widely open to interpretation, and it's the requirement that that a surrogate endpoint or a biomarker be reasonably likely to predict clinical benefit.
Mm.
reasonably likely is a very,
Sounds like
you
there's a
know,
subjective element in that
so
assessment.
it's hugely subjective, and that
Mm,
has allowed the political views of a lot of FDA directors and
I
reviewers
see.
to then filter
Okay.
in. They'll say, "Well, I don't think this is reasonably likely, so I will not approve this drug."
Mhm.
So I think that taking the politics out of the FDA is really important. The other piece that I think would really, take some of this variability out of the equation is making recommendations from FDA binding on the FDA side. So right
Right.
now, FDA can tell you, okay, follow ABC steps, and you do that. And at the end of it, they say, well, we changed our mind. Now we want you to do DEF. And that just makes it very difficult for drug developers. It makes it difficult for patients to understand. And there's a huge financial consequence to that in the
Mhm.
pharmaceutical industry. So I think taking that variability away is important. And I think that, the third aspect that I would highlight is most important to change um, is humanizing people, to the FDA. This might
Mhm.
shock people, but many FDA reviewers, I think the majority, in fact, have never met a patient with the disease that they're making
Really?
a decision on.
Wow.
I know
That would
that was
shock
the
most
case.
people, I think, to hear that.
Yeah, it was certainly the
Yeah.
case, when we were developing rare disease drugs at my prior company, and I just think
Mm.
that's completely unacceptable because the way that you view the urgency to treat, and the risk-benefit, evaluation and really deciding what the need is based on the data in front of you, if you just view that in black and white words on the paper, it's completely different than if you've ever met a patient,
Mhm.
with that need and felt the urgency from, the family's perspective. So
Yeah.
I think that should just be a requirement. You shouldn't be allowed to make any
Mhm.
decisions on drugs for a disease until you've
Mhm.
actually met patients with that disease.
Yeah, that's a tremendous point because, people who are in crisis, whether it's health or whatever, especially health though, they want help right now. They don't wanna
Yeah.
hear that something is gonna be available even next week or next month. They need help right now. They want that change now, and so these sort of bureaucratic delays, if we can call them that,
Yeah.
are very frustrating, and they do impact. Do have serious health impacts, don't they?
Yeah.
Both individually and in terms of societal impacts. If you have these life saving drugs that are held up in, let's call it, red tape, that's a serious problem for the entire system, isn't it?
It is, and I think a lot of the delays, and, CRLs, which are rejections at FDA, and then resubmissions that happen, are in this category of, bureaucracy. They want
Hmm.
a
Hmm.
data set reformatted, they want you to resubmit the package in a different way, and that's fine if it's really needed. But everyone that's making those requests and causing those delays at FDA should understand what that time increment does. So that's fine.
Yeah.
We'll resubmit it and you'll make a decision in a year, but during that year, here's how many children will die. Or during
Hmm.
that year, here's the cognitive damage that's going to happen to these patients so that, there's really a context for for what those bureaucratic or administrative delays cost. And I think it's the same with with additional requests for clinical trials and clinical data. So every time a company is sent back to do another clinical trial, if it's really imperative and it's safety related or, definitively efficacy related, then of course that makes sense. But I
Hmm.
think understanding what that 5-year delay or the 7-year delay will mean to patients with that disease, is something that isn't really interpreted that way on the
Hmm.
regulatory
Hmm.
side right now.
I realize you're not an expert in this, but I'm just thinking about, for example, the use of AI in this process.
Yeah,
And on the one hand, you could think, well, perhaps AI would increase efficiency, as sometimes it does.
yeah,
But it seems to me also that it could make this dehumanization problem worse, couldn't it?
yeah. Yeah, I think it's an important balance. You're absolutely right. If used correctly, there are ways that AI can really speed up the review process and cut that timeline down. So, let's say, even if the FDA decided a reformatting of a package was, really that important, that's fine. It could then
Right.
be evaluated in the course of a couple of weeks or a month rather than, over a year. And the difference in that delay is really meaningful to people. And I think also on the drug safety front, it takes years and years. I mean, on average, about 3 to 5 years to even get the drug into patients. So through those preclinical stages, it's a lot of animal testing. And I think, there's been a lot of discussion about this that AI tools are in many cases more accurate in predicting those preclinical risks rather than actual testing on dogs and rats. And so I think there are ways that we can really use AI effectively to benefit the drug development process and help patients to get the drugs that they need more quickly. But it
Hmm.
does have to be
Hmm.
used correctly. You're absolutely right.
Right. So we've covered some of the work that you're doing in the medical field. I wanted to touch on some of the work that you're doing in education because you're very involved here as well. You're a trustee at Columbia University, and I saw a piece that was published on an appearance you did on Fox News talking about higher education in the U.S. being at a crucial crossroads. This is very true in Canada as well, and you warn that there's a growing culture of disruption and intimidation on campus that threatens the values of open dialogue and rigorous debate. And you frame this in terms of being, as you described, a first generation American and a scientist whose family comes from a situation where you were persecuted. I want to
Right.
talk about this a little bit because this is an issue that obviously really came to the public mind last summer with what was going on at universities, not only in the U.S. but also in Canada. Um, and I don't think it's quite gone away. For example, when you see the new mayor of New York swearing on the Quran. It seems to me that as a Jewish person or a Christian, for that matter, this is concerning in terms of our universities. And I know this is something very important to you. And I'd like to hear your perspective on this, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. I mean, I'll refrain from commenting in any of my leadership roles, but I will tell you I have two daughters in college. And as an aside, they're also science majors, and they're
Carrying on the
probably going to head
tradition.
into a similar field of
Wonderful. Yeah.
medicine.
Wow. That's great. If
Um,
there's two more like you out there, then that's great.
Thanks. But I do, I obviously think about them constantly as a parent, and making sure that the world is a better place for them and that, we all have opportunities to do our best in life and to make the world a better place for others. So I'm always thinking about that with them. I do think it ties very closely to this aspect of building and destroying. And I don't
Yeah.
think it necessarily has much to do with religion, but more grounded in, am I building things up? Am I making things better? Or am I focused on destroying people, on hatefulness,
Hmm.
on negative activities? And I think that if people are really focused on ways that they can make the world a better place through whatever that is, like whatever your thing is, whatever your skill set is, whatever
Right.
your interests are. And it applies to all of the aspects that you mentioned, from campus climate to politics to just, regular everyday activities. And my hope is that, for my daughters and for everyone's children, we're able to turn a little bit more in that direction,
Hmm.
of really thinking like, what can I add to this situation that will improve things, that will build things up and solve problems, rather than just destroying what someone else has built, or
Hmm.
adding
Hmm.
hate to the world. I don't think that hatred and destruction are helpful on any level.
No, it's very destructive and it's worrisome. I really see, for example, anti-Semitism as a bellwether that something is wrong in society. You see the rise of anti-Semitism throughout history is a sign that there's something wrong that's got to be addressed. And I think it's very important to talk about it, but also, as you say, to find constructive rather than destructive ways to discover what the problem is and how to deal with it. And the universities are a real flashpoint for that because, um, like you, I spent a lot of time at university. I always thought of it as an open place, as a place of freedom,
Yeah,
not only intellectual freedom, but for exchange of ideas. And so if we lose that, we're losing something really, really crucial in the bedrock of our civilization, aren't we, in the West?
I absolutely agree.
Yeah. And talking about civilization, I don't want to put you on too much on the spot, but um, you know what's happening in Iran right now. And by the way, I did a study of Iran, a little bit of a study because I have a friend, a Canadian friend, who's a podcaster who, like you, he emigrated to the West, to in Canada. In his case, he lives in Vancouver. Brilliant guy, and he's a Christian. His name is Payman Asghari,
Mm.
and through him, I learned a lot about Persian culture, Iranian culture, and so obviously, what's going on over there right now, the eyes of the world are on that, and you must be watching this closely as well, given
Yeah.
your deep ties to that country. Iran is a country of amazing potential, isn't it? I mean, this is the to me, it's the great travesty of Iran because it could offer so much to the people, not only our own people, but to the rest of the world. And the regime there is really preventing all of that from happening. Do you want to comment a little bit? I realize you're not a political commentator, but you obviously have an insight into this that most people would not possess, and so that's why I ask.
Sure. Of course, under the disclaimer of I'm not a political expert, you're right that I do see, what's happening now, the limitations on people and their freedoms, and that spans from everything, on the one end on free speech and religion, but also even on things like career choices. Like women, I wouldn't be able to be a scientist in Iran. Women are really
Or your
very
daughters,
restricted,
yeah.
or my daughters,
Hmm.
exactly. And I know that when I look at my family, that's something that really jumps out at me because it's a clear step backwards. And I think that, to your point, when the world is going in the wrong direction and taking steps backwards, we all need to evaluate and constructively look at how we can help improve the situation. But prior to the revolution, there were, equal educational opportunities for women. There are a lot of female doctors and scientists in Iran. All three religions, Jews, Christians, Muslims, lived relatively peacefully alongside,
Hmm.
even other religions that were there. And I think
Yeah.
a lot of that
As
has
they do in
taken some
Israel
time.
today, actually. A lot of people don't realize
Correct.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So I think it's unfortunate the turn that it's taken. I hope that it improves for everyone's sake, not just for the Persian community in Iran and outside of Iran. But I think it's sometimes a larger global issue of are we moving forwards or are we
Mhm.
moving backwards?
Well, I appreciate you providing that insight. This is the part of our program where we normally turn to a reading list. I must say, I'm astonished with all the things that you've done. You have not yet written a book. I expect that there's one in you. You just haven't had time. But having said that, what I'm going to ask you to do is, um, there must be a book or two in your history that really impacted your life or that you would recommend to people? Are there any that really strike you and come to mind that you'd recommend to people that we might add to our reading list in the absence of your book that's hopefully coming someday?
Yeah, I do have one book to suggest, and I'll tell you why on a couple of different levels. It's a book called "In Search of Memory" by Eric
Mm,
Kandel. For those who may not know, Eric Kandel is a Nobel laureate. He figured out on a scientific level how memory works, and in my
fascinating. Mm,
opinion, his book is extremely well written because it's written for non-scientists. It's written for
mm,
regular people to understand how memory works on a biochemical level, which I think is not something that a lot of people understand. But I think it's helpful because number one, it's nice for regular people to know how memory works. I think it's super interesting. But number two, it outlines the process. The scientific discovery process, and the research and the knowledge and the building that went into that and figuring out how memory works. And I also think that his personal history. He's a Holocaust survivor, and a lot of the struggles that he went through coming to this country, and being able to really build from nothing, the educational opportunities that were in front of him, and really the opportunity to create something amazing and to give back to the world, I think sets a really nice precedent for how we can live our lives. So that would be
Well,
my
yeah.
recommendation. It's not long. It's an
No,
easy read.
it sounds like a wonderful book, and I'm not surprised, given what we've learned about you, that you would have chosen that one because, of course, it's very consistent with you and what you do. And I want to thank you so much for being with us. It's been really joyful getting to know you a little bit. God has really blessed you and your family, and what's just as wonderful is that you realize that, and you know you have a sense of that, and you're giving so much of yourself, of the blessings that you've received, back to the people around you, whether it's in your own family or at the university or in the biotech industry. It's been a real pleasure getting to know you, and I hope God continues to bless you and your family and all the incredible work that you're doing. I want to thank you so much for being our special guest here today, Dr. Shendelman.
Thank you so much, Leighton. Really appreciate it.